Everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Cost-Effective Ways to Improve School Zone Safety Amid a Pandemic, put on by TAPCO and Toole Design Group. Appreciate everyone joining us. I'm Steve Paulus, TAPCO's Marketing Communications Manager, and I'll be moderating today's chat. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items to go over. All participants will be muted during the webinar to eliminate any background noise and feedback issues. I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with the process now. You will see on the right-hand sidebar, there's a chat functionality. Most of you are already using that. Wishing everyone good morning. We encourage you to continue to utilize the chat function, leave comments, ask questions. I will be asking the presenters those questions back 15 minutes of today's hour during a Q&A session. So I will mark them and we will circle back the final 15 minutes. And also at times throughout the discussion, you will see a few poll questions pop up in the chat feature. We encourage you to take a moment and answer them as well. It's some really good insights for us to understand what's going on school zone safety throughout the nation. Looking at today's agenda, we'll review the impacts of the pandemic on school zone safety, strategy to improve pickup and drop off, flunking school zones, additional school zone safety solutions, technologies, and system enhancements that are new to the marketplace that may be of use for certain folks depending on their application. A little bit about TAPCO here. For those that are not aware of TAPCO, we are based out of the greater Milwaukee, Wisconsin area and are a third generation family-owned organization, really focused to drive increased road safety for all road users. To do this, we focus on our core 4 organizational strengths of service, expertise, innovation, and quality. Today, we are focused on expertise by facilitating this topic within the traffic industry that hopefully can benefit everyone on the call, agencies, and communities across the nation. So thank you for joining. Now to introduce our presenters today. Our first expert today is Sonia Heikel. Sonia is a transportation planner for Toole Design Group, the nation's leading bicycle and pedestrian planning and engineering firm. She has over a decade of experience in multimodal transportation, including safe routes to school plans, bicycle wayfinding, and community bicycle and pedestrian plans. She has worked on national safe routes to school projects in Wisconsin, California, Florida, Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Ohio, and for the National Safe Routes to School Clearinghouse. A wealth of expertise is Sonia. Prior to joining Toole Design, she served as a Safe Routes to School coordinator here in Wisconsin for the Madison Metropolitan School District. We appreciate you joining the call, Sonia. Today's second presenter is product manager Robert Kirka. With over a decade of business development, marketing, and product management experience, Robert strives to improve transportation safety through innovation. He is a pedestrian safety solutions expert who especially enjoys working with the TAPCO family to develop life-saving products and solutions. It's the newly released Safe Walk Crosswalk Illuminator. So without any additional delays, I'll kick it over to Sonia to start the discussion today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's so cool to see everybody chiming in the chat and see all the participation we have from all over the country. Before we begin, I wanted to know what your top safety concern is in your school zones. You can answer this question for several school zones or just the one that is at top of mind right now. So is it speed and volume of traffic near schools? Is it specifically that the intersections aren't safe for students to cross, distracted drivers, unsafe student behavior? And I'm sure there's lots and lots of others that we didn't include here. So if you have another one, just write it in the chat. Or I guess you can, it looks like you can add new. I'm not sure. Well, it looks like from the people that have answered so far, speed and or volume of traffic near schools is really the top, which makes sense because, you know, that kind of is included in the intersections are not safe for students to cross. If it's a really busy road with high speeds, then it kind of that's kind of included in that. I'm going to just give it like 5 more seconds to see if we have any more people. All right. Well, I'm going to try and refer to that then in a later part of my presentation. So I'm going to be focusing a little bit on, what are the impacts of the pandemic, and then mainly on school zone safety. Using the what we're learning during the pandemic for how we can apply it to school zone safety. And first, I'm going to just give you a bit of background about where I'm coming from, my perspective. Then I'll briefly talk about some trends we've seen in the pandemic, and then really focus in, as I said, on the school drop-off and pickup process, both on changing behavior and on changing the infrastructure to make things safer. So let me talk about my background first. I got into the field of school travel safety in 2012 when I became a Safe Routes to School coordinator for the school district in Madison, Wisconsin. That position was funded through a grant called the Federal Transportation Alternatives Program. And I had a lot of duties to promote walking and biking to school. So that included bicycle and pedestrian education, creating competitions for walking and biking, helping schools with their safety patrol programs. And then among those duties was also developing traffic safety plans. And I'm showing 2 schools whose plans I worked on. One of them in a very suburban style area on the outskirts of the city of Madison, and then one in Madison's downtown area. After that job, I continued working on school travel safety as a project planner at Toole Design. Toole Design is the leading firm specializing in multimodal transportation planning and design, and we are unique among similar firms in that we're really mission driven. We have a focus on equity and doing good, and we're also truly multidisciplinary. So every team that we have combines engineers and planners to ensure that whatever our recommendations our planners make are actually feasible and constructible. One of our firm's specialty areas is school transportation safety. And as a firm, we've worked on school travel projects for over 500 schools throughout the United States. And I personally have worked on school travel issues at over 50 schools in my time at Toole Design. So yeah, what have we seen in the pandemic? Well, first off, less traffic on the roads did not necessarily make things safer. With the streets empty, speeds went up and people were driving in a riskier way. That may have also just been due to mental health and needing stimulation from young people. Who knows? But that is one of the things that we saw. And then looking forward to this year and beyond, I think a lot of parents are reluctant to send their kids on the bus. They may be comfortable sending their kids to school, but the kids on the bus are a different cohort. So to reduce the risk of COVID, they may be choosing to drive their own kids to school. And then also some school districts are even encouraging families to skip the school bus because of capacity concerns on the school bus. And then finally, we've seen in cities around the world a huge increase in walking and biking activity. This continues, and I don't think it's a trend that's going away even as gyms and indoor exercise opportunities are opening back up. My husband works in a bike shop, and I can attest that bike shops are still overwhelmed with people looking for new bikes or to fix up their bikes. So providing people with safe infrastructure for walking and biking is going to be a continuing need. And that's one of the reasons that I want to focus on walking and biking in the rest of this presentation. So I really want to focus on strategies, not necessarily for school zones in general, but specifically the drop-off and pickup process. Why is that? Well, first of all, when students are actually present outside the school, that's when the vast majority of traffic outside the school are those students' family vehicles. And then secondly, when principals or parents contact elected officials about school traffic, most of the time it is about the behavior of the families themselves at drop off and pickup. It's not about the behavior of the traffic in the middle of the day when students are in class. So I'm going to talk about two strategies or two approaches that work for improving safety of drop off and pickup. And one of those is this behavior change, changing people's behaviors. And then the other is actually changing the infrastructure. So for any of you dealing with arrival and dismissal traffic around schools, I want to refer you to these two resources. And Hannah from TAPCO is going to be dropping the yep, there she did. She dropped the links to these two documents in the chat. So the first is this keep calm and carry on to school, which is what I'm showing here on the slide. It's only 8 pages. It's brief. It's great. I think it's great for sharing with principals because principals don't have enough time, and it just provides a great outline of how to improve arrival and dismissal. And then if that's not enough for you and you need more detail, this second one, improve your school arrival and departure procedures by Feet First in Seattle, it goes into much more detail. So what are some key concepts for behavior change, first of all? There's 4. One of them is prioritize walking and biking first. Oh yes, and I should have mentioned TAPCO will include those links in an email after the presentation. So the 4 concepts are, first of all, prioritize walking and biking. Second of all, use a holistic approach. Don't just use engineering. Do throw everything you can at it. Engineering, education, encouragement, enforcement, and think about equity as well. Third, separate modes. So separate students arriving by bus from parent traffic, separate students arriving by foot from people biking, etc. And then finally, communication. And communicate what your expectations are to everyone, school bus drivers and parents. So why prioritize walking and biking? First, if you don't prioritize walking, no matter what you do, you will still be left with all of these vehicles. And in effect, you're just kind of pushing them around. So the goal should be first to try and get the number of vehicles down so that they are easier to manage. And I wanted to illustrate this picture again of those 2 schools that I did traffic safety planning for in Madison. This one on the left has it still has a dedicated drop-off area for family vehicles. The one on the right really does not. There's no room for that. But it was the one on the left that was constantly having problems and drawing complaints from parents and principals and elected officials because there were so many vehicles in this drop-off loop, and they were creating problems when they were turning left back onto the street. So this drop-off circle was like a giant flashing sign that said, "We drive our kids to school at this school." And this other school, which had much younger students because it only went up to 2nd grade, so you might think they would be less likely to walk. It actually had more families walking and biking. The other thing is to use a holistic approach. So on this slide, I'm going to cover 3 of the E's. In Safe Routes to School planning, we talk about the 5 E's or the 6 E's or the 7 E's. They're always adding extra E's, but I think I'm going to go over 6 E's today. So one of them is, the first one is evaluation. You have to know what the problem is that you're dealing with. So before you make any changes to the school zone, you have to go and observe. If you're responding to the complaint of a principal or a parent, just go and observe arrival and dismissal with that person who initiated the complaint. It does not have to be complicated. It can be helpful to have a tracking sheet to log, the number of people crossing or engaging in unsafe behavior. If you want to do a full-on safe routes to school plan, we often ask people to take surveys. It's quite easy nowadays to survey older students. You just send them a link to an online survey via their email. That's assuming that you have approval from the school principal to do that. Younger students, they're not reading it, so you'd have to have the teachers administer that. But I find that the most useful surveys are of parents to determine what their concerns are. Sometimes they can identify concerns that aren't immediately obvious. The reason that equity is on here is that often the schools that have the greatest safety threats and needs are not the ones that get the most attention. So, make sure you're prioritizing your time and your efforts on the schools that need it most. I included a map that my firm and I created for the city of Milwaukee that helps the Department of Public Works staff allocate the time on schools that have a lot of kids that live nearby, a lot of a lot of students potentially walking, and also that are located near high crash streets and intersections. So obviously you don't have to do this level of analysis, but you can pay attention to where crashes do occur for people walking and biking in your community and focus on those areas first. And then enforcement. I've got a picture of a safety patrol student up here. Is she really enforcement? Well, enforcement is really just about reminding people about the behavior they should be engaging in. And so she's reminding pedestrians on the sidewalk, that they should watch before crossing this driveway. And she's also reminding the car drivers that they should be looking out for pedestrians on the on the sidewalk before they turn into this driveway. If your police department is willing, they can also help drive home the right behaviors at the start of the school year or the start of the semester. They don't even need to issue tickets, just help inform parents of the behavior they should be doing. And then also education. So you can do pedestrian education, bicycle safety education. See if you can involve school staff like PE teachers or social workers to encourage walking and biking to school. I have found that bike education at middle schools is really effective at empowering middle schools to bike to school and be safe about it. And these things like these golden sneaker awards shown in the bottom right really work well for elementary students. Another thing that schools can do to promote walking and biking is just walking school buses or even bike trains. So a walking school bus, which is shown up in the right corner, upper right corner, it's where groups of students are chaperoned to school by an adult along a predetermined route and time. And again, this can be completely casual. A group of parents at my kids' school got together and just agreed to take turns walking their kids to and from school. Or it can be more formal, like you can get official volunteers from, for example, the senior center to come and do it on certain days of the week, like Mondays and Wednesdays. And they publish a map and have official stops. So one of the other principles is to separate modes of traffic. And here on the left, I'm showing cars in the bus lane. And family vehicles in the bus lane can be dangerous because the buses block the views of kids who are crossing between them. And the behavior of family vehicles is different than the behavior of school buses. So the photo at the right shows just a very simple, cost-effective solution. Just put some cones out and then have a staff member or a student safety patrol move the cones when the buses arrive. And likewise, you want to identify a separate path for people walking and to school and biking to school, and keep those separate from car traffic as well. And then finally, communication. Anyone working in schools will know about what's called positive behavior. What is it? It's positive behavior, PBS. I can't remember what it is, but basically the idea is you communicate your expectations to families, and then you follow up on those expectations to families. And so Expectations around arrival and dismissal, that's something that the principal will need to communicate on a regular basis. The most basic thing that the school should have is just a map showing and explaining the arrival and dismissal procedures. And to reach every family, a good rule of thumb is to use at least 5 different ways to send out that message. So how do you fund these programs that I've just mentioned? Well, one of them would be, for education or encouragement programs, your local hospital or your health foundation, they often need to, they're required to spend money on health issues in their communities. Public health departments might not have money themselves, but they can be great partners on grants. The Federal Transportation Alternatives Program that I mentioned before can help you develop those school travel safety plans and also can fund infrastructure around schools, which we're going to talk about later. And then these PEP grants, the Carroll White Physical Education Program grants, those are how some schools, at least in Wisconsin that I'm familiar with, have purchased bikes for their middle school PE classes. So that summarizes the behavior change component, but it's hard to actually reduce that car traffic and encourage people to walk and bike to school more if the actual streets around the school are not safe for people. So how do you decide what kinds of engineering treatments will help make it safer? Well, there's some really excellent resources for that as well, and Hannah just posted the link to this guide, and again, it will be included in the email afterwards. This guide has some really great guidance. It ranges from changing parking restrictions around crosswalks to narrowing traffic lanes so that speeds go down to speed humps. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that when you do make these changes, you should really just focus on the area a half a mile from school or less, because that's where the greatest impact is. Areas further away might be serious safety concerns, but that's something that the school district should, if that's the case, over a half mile from school, the school district should probably just bus the students due to that transportation hazard if it can't be changed easily. The other resource that I use a lot is this FHWA guide for improving pedestrian safety at uncontrolled crosswalks. Really, there's the most important thing that is in that guide is this table, which prescribes the research-based countermeasures that are actually effective at reducing crashes. I actually refer to this table. I keep it on so often that I keep it on my desktop, as you can see on the lower left here of the screenshot of my computer's desktop. Basically, you can use this table to say, I have a 2-lane roadway with average daily traffic of 12,000 vehicles. It's about 30 miles per hour. What should I do? And so the table then says, well, you should always be looking at high visibility crosswalk markings, parking restrictions on the crosswalk approach, adequate nighttime levels, and crossing warning signs. So crossing warning signs in the school context would be those school crossing signs. And then, other things that you can look at in that context are an in-street pedestrian crossing sign, curb extensions, or pedestrian refuge island. And Robert is going to touch on some of the examples of how these crosswalks, what these crosswalks might look like that's been treated with this in his presentation. So that resource is specific to uncontrolled intersections, but most of those measures work for intersections that have stop signs or stoplights as well. If you are looking for, just a more general list of countermeasures for improving safety, this list is called the FHWA's Spectacular 7, and it's also something that I rely on regularly. So each one of these 7 countermeasures is a proven technique that has been shown to increase safety for pedestrians. And again, right there at the top is crosswalk visibility enhancements, oops, I think we lost some check marks there. But yes, the crosswalk visibility enhancements include school zone signage. Those do work. Leading pedestrian intervals at traffic signs, traffic signals, and other. I'm not going to go into these in deeply because Robert will touch on some of these in his presentation as well. So on that note, I'm going to hand it off to Robert to go into a deeper data dive and more specific solutions.
Thank you, Sonia. You did a great job. Sonia mentioned I'm going to focus a little more on the the engineering portion of this. Start off by going over school zone data and just building more on what Sonia already presented on about how the pandemic has impacted schools and other ways to improve school zone safety. So why do we focus on school zones? It's a big area of importance because there is a large amount of pedestrians and children that are in these school zones, not only during school hours, but after school hours as well. And one thing to consider is to look at how the pandemic changed school zones, the behavior for the students and for the drivers. There's a lot of things that may have changed with you. And one thing to note for these school zones is that communities can encourage more people to walk and bike to school by improving the school zone themselves and also the routes to school. Remember what Sonia was saying about that half-mile radius is the best area to focus on for school zones. And communities should encourage more students to walk and bike to school as it's for the health benefits. You know, you're getting exercise by walking and biking to school, more exercise, healthier children, healthier populations. So it continues to have a lot of positive effects. And then the other effect, if more and more people walk and bike to school, is there's less traffic congestion. So what is the school data looking right now? It's rather bleak. There's a lot more we can be doing to improve school zone safety. Each year, about 800 school-age children are killed during school travel hours, and over 150,000 are injured. Surprisingly, only 4% are due to buses, and a vast majority of these injuries and fatalities are due to passenger vehicles. Um, we need to also consider activities that happen before and after school during low light or dark conditions. Think about AM practices before school. You have practices after school. And then, look at sporting events. Those happen at night, wintertime, Wisconsin, or any northern latitude. It gets dark at 5 o'clock, and those events definitely go past 5 o'clock. So one thing to do is consider increasing the lighting in and around your school areas. Just to show a little bit more about the about the fatalities that occur, you can see that a majority of the fatalities happen from 6 to 9 p.m. and then again from 9 p.m. to about midnight. This is, like I said, there's activities going on, people are still active, and the reason why for these high fatalities is simple, that drivers just can't see the pedestrians. Also for other reasons why there's high injuries and fatality rates. One of them is that pedestrians or children are distracted, not only crossing streets, but in and around these school zones. Here's just a quick survey of the numbers of how many people, 80% of students are engaged in unsafe crossing behavior. So when we're communicating drop-off behavior to parents, we also need to communicate to the students safe behavior, not only crossing, but also while in the school zones themselves. Sonia went over some of the unsafe driving behavior, at schools and ways to improve it. It's not only distracted drivers in school zones, it's everywhere. It's a huge issue. So we have distracted pedestrians and distracted drivers, which is not a good mix. In addition, 55% of the fatalities occur when a teenager is driving. Teenagers only account for less than 10% of the drivers on the road, but this large portion of fatalities. And it's really just because they are inexperienced. So there are ways that we can help drivers bring awareness to pedestrians ahead to hopefully capture their attention or to increase their stop and yield rates. In addition, one other thing that we do is lower speed limits in the school zones. But drivers may not always know when they're in effect. We'll go over some reasons why speed is important in the next slide. So not only do we have to consider lowering the speed limit in the school zones, but also in the routes to schools. 25 miles an hour, that's a great, or 25 miles an hour or less. There's some cities who are going to 20 miles an hour. It's great. Why is speed so important? Faster speeds do a lot. They're very deadly. So you can see as you go faster, your field of vision decreases. That doesn't mean you can't see it. It's just you're unable to react to it in time. Also see the exponential increase in your stopping distance. And then at the bottom is the pedestrian. If pedestrian is impacted, the likelihood of survival. You can see that if you just lower the speed limit by 10 miles an hour, you're more or less doubling the likelihood that a pedestrian is going to survive an impact. Other part of the energy equation, we're not going to go too much detail, is mass. So energy is half of the mass times the velocity squared. So velocity definitely has a larger impact, but mass also has something to play. Data shows that we are selling more and more larger vehicles. So think, crossovers and SUVs replacing sedans. It's huge. So that's another reason why there's so many fatalities on the roadway for pedestrians. We have another poll question. So if you can, please answer it. And what I mean by low cost or short-term creative solutions, these are paintings, pop-up bike lanes, temporary delineators, barricades, just some innovative methods that you can do. So if you can answer the poll, that would be beneficial. Thank you. Give it a minute or so. So it looks like it's more or less even mix. It's which reduction is most effective for you? The leading one with 30% of the answers is the school zone speed limit warning system, followed by those creative solutions, and then tied is speed bumps, tables, and driver radar feedback signs. So I'll move on and go into a little bit more detail about each one of these. Just for reference, we're not going to be going over too much detail in this presentation, but TAPCO has released a how-to guide that just goes into more detail on other resources, other countermeasures, other things that you can do. So please review that. I believe an email will be going out with that link. There are many ways to find solutions for your school zones and routes to schools. As Sonia mentioned, the Safe Roads to School, those programs outlines what you should do in each step, has guidance, offers support. There are a bunch of resources out there. Please use them. One step that I've seen a lot in all the presentations that I've been a part of is the walk analysis. So get a group of people together, walk around the school to see, okay, what's safe, what's unsafe, how do I feel? What are some ideas for improvements? What can we do in this area to make it better? And if you've previously done one of the walk audits, I would encourage you to do one again after or during the pandemic to see what impacts they've had. There's a lot of traffic routes that have changes. There's a lot of different things going on. Is there more walkers and bikers? We want to encourage that. How is the traffic doing? So just see what impacts the pandemic has had on that. In addition to the walk audits, I would encourage everybody to distribute surveys to find out transportation challenges for members of your communities. It can help you focus on what you can do. Be going over now a little bit more of the engineering portion of the Safe Routes to School program. So Sonia did a great job of reviewing the pick-up, drop-off policy. So those behavior changes, what to do to help communicate that. Remember, the at least 5 different ways to communicate it is best. There are other things we can do as well to prioritize bicyclists and pedestrians. Talked about the pop-up bike lanes. That's where you use delineators or other creative methods to kind of work with communities and with your public works officials just to create dedicated lanes for walkers and bikers. This can be done during the duration of the pandemic or hopefully a long-term option. The city of Seattle has done a great job of being creative in some of the routes. Other things you can do is convert roads into complete streets. A complete streets program is something that considers all road users, so bicyclists, pedestrians, and vehicles. Fortunately, in Wisconsin, there's one that just happened in Tosa. We won't be reviewing it, but if you look at down the Tosa Village, they did a great job with that. And another way is to create those bike trains that Sonia went over, the walking or biking trains. Get a group of people together to bring awareness. Another thing we'll touch base, we won't go into too much detail on, is tweaking of traffic signals and what you can do. You can reprogram lights, if you can do it during set times, to always place that call button so people don't have to press the button. There's also new push button technology that you don't actually push the button, you just wave your head in front of that. And because of COVID, it's going to prevent, the risk of spreading bacteria or viruses or, other germs. So there's a lot you can do out there to help improve traffic signals and also crosswalk activation devices. Some other things you can do if you have a budget are install more bike racks. Focus on areas prone to gatherings and away from vehicles to put these at. We'll just encourage people to walk and bike to school more. Said, along with delineators, we've seen people put delineators and bike racks by crosswalks and to kind of create a pinch point. So that increases the visibility that a driver is going to see a pedestrian on the side. And then it also shortens the distance that a pedestrian will have to walk. Other things we can do is make crossing guards' lives easier. There's high visibility apparel that have LEDs in them, so they're effective both day and night. Another cool thing is a visual alert LED paddle. So that's an LED enhanced paddle that blinks to bring awareness to the stop sign for crossing guards. There's also portable in-street pedestrian signs that go on a rubber base. There's different weights of them. One is portable, so somebody can carry that. This is a crossing guard. That's one way to improve visibility, is just buy a portable in-street pedestrian sign. We'll show an in-street pedestrian sign in the next slide. And one of the biggest things to do is do that crosswalk visibility enhancements. These should be done on every crossings, especially in school zones. They can reduce crashes by 23 to 40% according to the HWA. That's the STEP program, one of the spectacular 7. A lot of these methods are in there, so I encourage everybody to look at that. So here's just a picture of an updated crosswalk that was done in Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin. It's a great example. They've done a lot to it. So when we're talking about crosswalk visibility enhancement, it's not just one thing, making the high visibility crossing at all the things. There's more to it. You add your in-streets pedestrian signs you can see in the median, and then also improve your W11-2 signs to make them have the highest grade retroreflectivity. Other things they've done here is you can see there's a bike lane. It's clearly marked and painted. You could add some green paint to that to bring more awareness or attention to it. You see they have pedestrian pedestrian refuge island. It actually uses a staggered crosswalk design. There's a TAPCO blog about that staggered crosswalk design. That forces pedestrians to face oncoming traffic while they're in the median to hopefully make eye contact with drivers. That's important facial recognition, so drivers know to yield to the pedestrians. You'll also see that advanced yield line. That's more important when you're, 4-lane roads, or if there's multiple lanes in each directions. You set those 20, 30, 40, 50 feet back, either a stop or a yield line, depending on your state traffic laws. You can supplement that with a sign, stop or yield here for pedestrians. And that makes sure that the driver in a left lane knows why the driver in the right lane is stopping. They're not double parked, they're not delivering, they're stopping for pedestrians. So it increases drivers' visibility of the pedestrians. You'll also see here an RRFB system. We'll go in a little more detail on it. But you'll see that they also use that in the median pulse. So it really captures the driver's attention that, pedestrian is activating this. What is not pictured here, you can see that this road is very curvy. In advance of this curve, they actually have another RRFB, an advanced warning RRFB. So to alert those drivers oncoming that there is a pedestrian using the crosswalk. And they also have a radar feedback sign or a driver feedback sign. So those are things to encourage pedestrians to slow down, and driver feedback sign to encourage drivers to slow down, and the RFB to say there's a pedestrian in the crosswalk. We'll go a little bit more into some of the safety devices for school zones and crosswalk safety, primarily using LED enhanced devices. One way is that school zone speed limit alert. That was a very popular response. You can either use these with beacons, we call them blinker beacons, and they just bring awareness that a school zone speed limit is in fact. So it helps slow drivers down. We went over why lower speeds are important, because they help save lives. Generally, these are activated via a time clock. And there's multiple methods. You can physically go to the device, hardwire with your laptop, and put in your calendar. Better ways to do it are use a BlinkLink. TAPCO is a cloud-based platform where you can remotely schedule, monitor, and view the system. And then if you have an old punch time clock system, so when you have to go on the site, you can actually upgrade that with the 4G modem so you can get BlinkLink access to it. If your community is not a fan of the beacons or flashers, some communities call them, there's also blinker sign LED enhanced signs. These bring attention to the school zone sign in all weather conditions. Once again, usually activated by a time clock. And the blinker signs have been proven to slow drivers down by as much as 53%. A little bit more about the BlinkLink software. So I said you can control your users who can access that system. They can remotely schedule different school zones, as individual system so when that alert will be activated. You can do 8 unique day types with up to 16 activations per day for 2 years. And one thing that is really good with these systems is you can remotely turn them on and off. So think about early in the pandemic when you had your schedules, how do you turn them off? Well, remotely you can manually override the system to turn it off. Or we're talking about events. There's an event now after school, it may have a lot of people in there. So you can override and turn that on to bring people drive awareness that the slower speed limit should be used. Another device to enhance those school zone systems is what we call a blinker radar, or just a radar feedback sign. And that's going to let the driver know how fast they're going. It's actually proven to slow drivers down as much as 9 miles an hour in school zones. Another thing I want to touch about school zones and the speed limits, because the high amount of people that said speeding is an issue, you can use speed tables and cushions. There's actually rubber options available that are permanent. I mean, they can be removed too if you need for snow plows in winter, but generally speaking, they're a permanent solution. And we all know that vertical deflection is the best way to slow drivers down, but drivers don't like it because they work and it forces people to slow down. If you're in an emergency route area, there's speed cushions. So you space them far enough apart, there's a gap that fire trucks or other emergency vehicles can drive over them without having to drastically slow down. There's other temporary solutions like a strip of speed bumps. So there are other opportunities out there to slow drivers down in addition to these systems. We'll shift gears a little bit and go into crosswalks. There's a variety of crosswalk solutions. Most popular is the RFB system, and that's just because it has proven high yielding rates. So as much as 90% of drivers, or if you're in Canada, they get to about 100%. So they're really effective at making drivers yield to pedestrians. One thing we're not going to go over in this presentation is touchless options. So I talked about the touchless push button there. You can push or wave at the button to activate these systems. And there's also, thermal activation options or infrared bollards that can be used. That's going to, in that how-to guide that will be included in this email. Another enhancement are in-road warning lights. These are physically embedded into the roadway, and they activate when the crosswalk system is activated. So they flash in unison, and it's proven to nearly double the rates of motorists yielding to pedestrians. Another cool enhancement for crosswalk systems is the Safe Walk crosswalk illuminator. So this only activates at night and when a pedestrian has activated the system. There's two adjustable brackets on it, so it can pretty much light up almost any crosswalks. If you don't have a perfect, crosswalk or pole placement, don't worry. These Safe Walk illuminators should be able to fit that. And they're designed to meet and exceed the FHWA's recommendation of 20 vertical locks at 5 feet. So we talked about how there's so much pedestrian and fatalities at night. I would really encourage, if you don't have adequate lighting, at least light up the crosswalk. Another cool thing is the TAPCO's connected vehicle interface. What this does is it will send an alert to vehicles that either A, school zone is in effect, or B, a pedestrian has activated the crosswalk, or C, it can go with any other TAPCO system. And it's technology agnostic. So it doesn't matter if your connected infrastructure is DSRC, so dedicated short range communication, or cellular, primarily 5G. What it does is we power over Ethernet to the roadside unit. We send our information to that roadside unit, and the roadside unit then sends that communication out. Okay, we got one last poll question. What system would you consider for your school? So out of the ones that I went over, what would be the most likely for you to implement? And once again, if there's other, please write that in the chat. Give it a bit more time. All right, so poll questions. Leading the way with about 45% is the RFB crosswalk, followed by that school zone speed limit warning system, and then the driver feedback sign, and then the Safe Walk crosswalk illuminator. Thank you everybody for participating in the poll. Looks like answers are still coming in. I'll wait another second. All right. So just to wrap things up, when you're investing in these high-tech solutions, so school zone, speed limit alerts, radar feedback signs, RFB systems, it's worth investing in preventative maintenance contracts. TAPCO now offers these, and it keeps those systems running at optimal performance for as long as possible. With these, the maintenance contracts, TAPCO will come on site to ensure it's properly functioning and will repair any parts that are covered underneath warranty. And that includes batteries. In addition, there's also other benefits to it. So we'll extend the warranty. TAPCO offers a 3-year battery, 5-year system, and 10-year solar panel warranty. So for each year it's underneath this preventative maintenance contract, we'll extend that warranty. And also at the time when service was completed, TAPCO technicians will provide you with documentation that the system was maintenance and how it performed. Wrap it up with going over some funding resources. There's a bunch of resources out there to help fund your projects. Sonia went over some of the behavior and other resources. TAPCO focuses more on the engineering and infrastructure resources. So there are a bunch of resources out there. TAPCO does have them listed on our website. And we also have some blogs about how to access these resources. So thank you, everybody. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat. Steve will help moderate.
Yes, thank you so much, Sonia and Robert. A lot of good information you went over, hopefully very useful for those who are attending. We did get a few questions throughout the presentation, and I'll start with how to address the issues of liability. Kind of when no one wants to assume the responsibility in case something may go wrong, right? Whether it's a city official or a school official. Sonia, have you experienced anything like that in your line of work where maybe someone doesn't want to take the baton and run with this?
Yeah, I would say that often the people that are worried are not necessarily, the lawyers themselves. So, getting I see was a question from Troy Merriam, and he said it was both city officials and school officials. I actually, I'm going to paste another resource in the chat there. It's about volunteers and liability. And so this answers specifically about, the walking school buses and the bike trains and other people who are volunteering to help cross students or walk students to school. If you are a volunteer, there is a federal Volunteer Protection Act that will protect volunteers from liability if they're volunteering for a school or a nonprofit or government agency, and if they're acting in the scope of their duties and they've been negligent. It will not cover the volunteer if the volunteer was extremely negligent or was under the influence of drugs or other things, like if they were, basically malicious. So that is one thing, one tip sheet to share with schools or city officials. The other thing is just involving the school and city, lawyers involved in these conversations, because in my experience, the people who are worried are just people who might not be familiar with the actual laws governing, liability and volunteers. That's what I have to in response to the question of volunteers. I don't have any thoughts about other liability concerns. So if there are, if there's some other liability concern, I'd be curious to know what that is.
Yeah, for us, it's just generally, if you're following either A, the MUTCD, or B, engineering, like you have your data, you have your research, that's really what you can rely on. I mean, it's, once again, as Sonia was stating, we're doing the best we can. We can't solve everything or consider every scenario and every situation. And fortunately and commonly, fatalities do happen. But as long as you're not being grossly negligent and doing what you can, you should be okay.
Really good insight there. More so on a few product questions, Robert, in regards to compliance. Are RFBs compliant for school zones, or is it just circle beacons?
So RFBs are compliant in school zones. I think we showed interim approval 21 compliant. Hopefully we'll have the MUTCD out soon, and there's a whole section. on it, so we could say MUTCD approved. Right now it's interim approval 21 approved. Yeah, as long as it's a school zone crossing, so you can't use the RFB on that school zone speed limit sign. Has to be in a crosswalk and activated by a pedestrian, so you can't use a time clock on an RFB crosswalk. It has to be pedestrian activated. But yes, you would, instead of putting your W11-2 sign on it, which is your ped crossing, you'd change it to an S1-1, which is the school zone pedestrian crossing.
Also, in regards to the safe walk, Robert, does that on all the time, or when does that activate? During the day and the night? Can you explain a little bit?
Yep, it only activates at night and when a pedestrian pushes or activates the system, either pushes the button or if there's a thermal detector or IR, other passive sensor. So it's not on during the day. I believe it turns on when there is less than 10 lux of light present. So there's a photocell on the light itself. It's connected to the TAPCO system. So it knows when to turn on. And then once I believe it's more than 30 lux of light is present, and then it will turn, it will not activate. So it only activates with only activates at night and when the system is activated.
Great. Gregory just asked a question here that I want to sneak in. Any issues with cities approving the use of touchless pedestrian push buttons, which is obviously not addressed in the MUTCD at this point?
I haven't heard of any. I believe it is now on the FDOT approval that touchless push buttons in there, and then in the proposed MUTCD, so it's not official yet, they do allow for that, and they are considering that. I don't know if there's any rulings that have been passed on it, but I haven't really heard of anything. I mean, it's still a push button. So it's from the supplier that TAPCO uses. It's the same thing as their next generation push button, except they have a radar in it. So you just wave it in front. So if you don't like it, you can actually turn that feature off and just make it a standard intelligent push button or accessible push button.
Thanks, Robert. I've actually seen those new push buttons, and they're pretty useful considering folks may not want to touch surfaces that are out in the public now. It's a pretty neat addition to the marketplace, in my opinion. Um, Real quick too here for Sonia, how can I start working with someone to evaluate our safety issue, similar to the example of the city of Milwaukee that you shared?
Well, you could hire Toole Design. Yeah, I would say if you want to do a full-on assessment of all of your school's safety issues, then the best thing to do would be to, to apply for a federal. I mean, you can look at other grants, but the most common source of a program like that would be federal transportation alternatives funds. Those you can usually apply through your MPO, through your local MPO. They're often, if you're in an urban area, which you'll be in an MPO, and those are the ones that distribute those. And so that's the most common source of funding. So you'd want to do basically a safe routes to school plan or a school traffic safety plan. Or if you just specifically want to do a prioritization to figure out which schools are highest priority, you could also, choose to do that, and it would reduce your your costs because you wouldn't have to do every single school right away. You could just figure out, you could use crash data and other data available from the school district to figure out what your top priority schools are first, and then just maybe address 10 schools a year or something like that. If you have any more questions, I think my email address will be available in the email. There it is. You can send me an email, sheichel@tooledesign.com.
Following up on that, Olivia asked, who actually determines school zones? who's responsible for those improvements. I know, speaking personally, a lot of the folks that we work with kind of are in that limbo of, is it city, county, is it this public school system, maybe a private school system? So are there any firm definitions there?
If you're in a city, it's your city's traffic engineer who will determine it. And generally, yes, it would be the city that would be responsible for improvements. If you're not in an incorporated area, it's probably your county public works department. There, so we didn't really talk about. So Robert talked about the MUTCD. The MUTCD, a lot of states have their own supplements to the MUTCD. And usually there's, just very minor changes, but for whatever reason, the school zone supplement to the MUTCD is usually kind of extensive. So the signage varies at what is a school zone and what is the right signage and what kinds of signs does a crossing guard have to wear? Those vary kind of widely from state to state. So if you are looking for more specific guidance on, school zone signing requirements, you should probably look to see if your state has a supplemental MUTCD, and specifically if they have that, supplemental chapter. I think it's chapter 9 is the school zone chapter.
I don't believe we have any additional questions at this time. However, please keep an eye out in your email inboxes for the webinar recording, all the resources we discussed and passed along, as well as the contact information if you want to reach out directly to Sonia and or Robert. We'll have a lot of additional resources coming your way. I believe we'll get that out at the latest tomorrow. So at this moment in time, we'll wrap up today's discussion. Thank you for everyone who attended. And again, if you have any questions, please reach out to either Sonia, Robert, or myself. Have a good week, all.